The girl they brought before him was bleeding. Not dramatically, not the kind of wound that demands attention. A thin line across her cheekbone, still fresh, where someone's ring had caught skin. She stood in the center of the great hall, with her wrists bound in front of her, her dress torn at the shoulder, and her hair falling loose around a face that should have been terrified. It wasn't. Kale had been sitting on the wolf throne for 600 years, and in that time, he had seen every expression a person could wear in this room. Fear, greed, worship, calculation. But the woman standing before him now, bruised, bound, delivered like livestock by her own father, wore none of these. She was furious. "A gift," Lord Aldrich announced, shoving his daughter forward with a hand between her shoulder blades. She stumbled, but did not fall. "For the Alpha King, my youngest, untouched, unmatched, and obedient." The last word was a warning, not a description. Kale could hear it in the slight tremor beneath the man's voice. He could smell the lie on him, sour, copper-tinged, layered under cheap wine and flop sweat. The girl lifted her chin and looked directly at the throne. No one looked directly at the throne. Something inside Kale's chest, something that had been frozen solid for so long he'd forgotten it existed, cracked. Not broke, not thawed, just cracked. A fracture so faint he almost mistook it for pain. His wolf, silent for decades, opened its eyes. "Her name," Kale said. His voice came out lower than he intended. The entire hall heard the shift in register. 60 wolves stopped breathing. Lord Aldrich blinked. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I asked for her name, not yours." The girl answered for herself. "Sarah." One word. No title attached to his. No curtsy, no deference. Just her name, thrown into the silence of the great hall, like a stone into still water. Kale's wolf surged forward so hard his vision flickered gold at the edges. He gripped the arm of the throne, ancient oak, carved with wolves mid-hunt, and the wood groaned under his hand. Mine. The word detonated inside his skull with a force that nearly buckled his composure. Not a thought, not a decision. A recognition, older than language, older than the curse that had turned his blood to winter 6 centuries ago. He stood. The hall recoiled. The Alpha King did not stand for anyone. He received, he judged, he dismissed. He did not rise from the wolf throne like a man who had just been struck by lightning and was trying to remember how his legs worked. "Remove her bindings," he said. Lord Aldrich's face went the color of old milk. "Your Majesty, she can be difficult. I would not want—" "Remove them, or I will remove your hands and use them to do it myself." The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear the torches guttering in their iron brackets. A guard stepped forward and cut the rope. It fell to the stone floor with a sound like a held breath finally released. Sarah rubbed her wrists. The skin beneath was raw and red. She did not thank anyone. Kale descended the 3 steps from the throne. Each footfall echoed. The court parted around him like water around the prow of a warship. He stopped 2 paces from her. Close enough to see the cut on her cheek was deeper than it looked. Close enough to see that her eyes were the color of rain on dark stone. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Warmth. He hadn't felt warmth in 600 years. His wolf was pacing now, frantic, pressing against the walls of his control. Cale held, barely. "You are not a gift," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "No one in this room has the right to give you." Her eyes widened, just slightly. The fury didn't leave, but something else flickered behind it. Confusion, maybe, or the first fragile ghost of recognition. "Then what am I?" she asked. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the answer his wolf was howling. Mate. Mine. Finally. After 600 years of ice and silence and nothing. Was an answer that would shatter every alliance in the room. Every expectation his court had built over centuries of his frozen, efficient, merciless rule. He turned to the hall instead. "She stays." Lord Aldrich opened his mouth. Cale looked at him, and the man's jaw clicked shut so fast his teeth cracked. "She stays," Cale repeated, "as my guest. Not as property, not as tribute. My guest." The whispers started before he'd finished the sentence. The fortress was a monument to cold. Stone walls, iron fixtures, corridors that amplified every footstep into an accusation. Sarah had been given a chamber in the east wing, large, well-furnished, and freezing despite the fire that a nervous maid had built in the hearth. The cold wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from everywhere, as if the castle itself had absorbed centuries of its master's condition and forgotten how to be warm. The maid's name was Alara. She was the only person in the fortress who had smiled at Sarah without calculation behind it. "He hasn't taken a meal with anyone in 40 years, Alara said, laying out a dress that was finer than anything Sarah had ever touched. Deep green soft wool lined with rabbit fur. "The court eats in the great hall. The king eats alone." "Then why does he want me at his table tonight?" Alara's hands paused on the fabric. "I don't know. But the last time he changed a routine, it was to execute a traitor." "So," she smiled, "perhaps this is better." The dinner was not better. It was a long oak table in a private room off the great hall, and Cale sat at the head of it, like a man enduring a siege. The firelight caught the planes of his face, the hard jaw, the scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline, the eyes that were so pale they looked almost silver. He was shirtless beneath a heavy fur-collared cloak thrown open, and the scars on his chest and arms told a story she couldn't yet read. He was enormous. Not just tall, built like something designed to break through walls. And he was watching her, with an intensity that made the air feel thin. "Eat," he said. "Is that a command?" "It is an observation that you are too thin, and the food is getting cold." Sarah sat. She did not touch the food. "Why am I here?" "Because your father is a coward, and a debtor who thought delivering his daughter to the Alpha King would settle his accounts." "I meant here." She gestured to the table. "This room, across from you. You don't eat with anyone." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, something more dangerous. Surprise that she had noticed. Surprise that she had said it aloud. "No," he said. "I don't." "Then why me?" The fire cracked. A log split and sent a shower of sparks upward. In the orange light, she saw his hand tighten around the edge of the table. The wood creaked. "I don't know," he said. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She picked up the bread and ate. The court decided within 3 days that she was unacceptable. Sarah heard the whispers in the corridors, caught the sidelong glances in the great hall, felt the temperature of every room she entered drop 2 degrees colder. And not from the curse. Lord Varon, the king's chief advisor, was the loudest voice. He was a tall, silver-haired wolf with the political instincts of a viper and the smile to match. He had served the crown for 200 years, and he wore his proximity to power like a second skin. "She is no one," Varon said, not bothering to lower his voice as Sarah passed the council chamber. The door was ajar. She stopped. The daughter of a disgraced minor lord. No wolf blood that anyone can trace. No alliance value. No breeding. The court is unsettled, Your Majesty. There are murmurs. Let them murmur. Kale's voice flat and cold. Murmurs become challenges. You know this. 3 noble houses have eligible daughters. Any one of them would strengthen. I said she stays. And the pack asks why. Varon's tone sharpened. You have not taken a Luna in 600 years. You have not shown interest in any living creature for longer than I can remember. And now, you fixate on a beaten girl with no name and no wolf. Forgive me, but the court deserves an explanation. The silence stretched. Sarah pressed her back against the stone wall, heart hammering. The court, Kale said slowly, deserves what I decide it deserves. She walked away before she could hear more. But that night, alone in her freezing chamber, she pressed her hand to the wall and felt the stone pulse with something she couldn't name. Something cold and old and desperately tired. He found her in the library 3 days later. She hadn't known the fortress had one until Alara mentioned it. A vast, vaulted room at the top of the North Tower, filled with books that no one had touched in what looked like centuries. Dust lay thick on every surface. The windows were narrow slits that let in pale, grey light. Sarah was sitting on the stone floor with a book open in her lap when his shadow fell across the doorway. "No one comes here," he said. "I noticed." She didn't look up. "The dust is older than most of your court." He stepped inside. The room seemed to contract around him, not because he was large, though he was, but because his presence had a gravity that bent everything toward it. He moved to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out over the forest that stretched endlessly below. "Varon wants you gone," he said. "I know. I heard him." His shoulders tensed. "You heard." The door was open. He wasn't quiet. Neither were you. She turned a page. "I am no one. No wolf blood, no breeding, no alliance value. You're angry. I'm accurate." She closed the book. "He's right, isn't he? About all of it. I am no one. I have nothing. My own father tied my wrists and delivered me like a sack of grain. So why am I still here?" He turned from the window. The grey light caught his face, and she saw something she hadn't seen before. Exhaustion so deep it looked like erosion. Like something had been wearing him down from the inside for centuries, grain by grain, and he was running out of material to lose. "Can I show you something?" he asked. Not a command, a request. She stood. He led her to the lower levels of the fortress, down stone stairs that spiraled into cold so intense her breath crystallized in front of her. At the bottom was a door, iron-banded and ancient, and beyond it a room she hadn't known existed. The walls were covered in frost. Not the frost of winter. This was something else. It grew in patterns that looked almost organic, spiraling outward from a central point on the floor where the stone was blackened as if by ancient fire. The cold was so severe that Sarah's fingers went numb within seconds. "This is where it started," Cale said. His voice was different here, quieter, younger almost. 600 years ago. A witch. Someone I trusted, He stopped. Swallowed. She cursed me, not my body, my ability to feel. Warmth, comfort, peace, connection. She burned it out of me like pulling a nerve from a tooth. I have ruled this kingdom for 6 centuries feeling nothing. Not the fire, not the sun, not the touch of another living creature. He held up his hand. In the frostlight, she could see that his skin had a faint blue undertone, like a man who had been cold so long that the cold had become part of his color. Until you. The word hung in the frozen air between them. When you stood in my hall, he said, and his voice cracked on the word stood, just barely, just enough. I felt warmth. For the first time in 600 years. Not much, not enough, but I felt it. And my wolf has been silent since the curse. Silent and still and dead. And when you said your name, he woke up. Sarah's eyes were burning, not from the cold. "I don't know what you are," he said. "I don't know why you. I don't know if this is real, or if the curse is playing some final, cruel trick before it finishes what it started. But I could not let you leave. I am sorry for that. But I could not." She stepped forward. He flinched. Actually flinched. The most powerful wolf alive recoiling from a woman half his size because she moved toward him instead of away. She took his hand. His entire body went rigid. A sound came from his throat. Not a word, not a growl. Something between a gasp and a fracture. His eyes blazed gold for a single, searing second. His fingers closed around hers with a grip that trembled. "Warm," he whispered. "You're warm." She didn't let go. The curse responded to hope the way a cornered animal responds to light. With violence. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more like it, take a moment to press that like button. It helps more than you know. Within a week of Sarah's arrival, the frost in the lower chamber had begun to spread. It crept up the stairwells at night, leaving patterns on the stone that Alara scrubbed away each morning with hot water, and growing fear in her eyes. The cold in the fortress deepened. Wolves began sleeping in the great hall near the fire pit because their chambers had become uninhabitable. And Cale was getting worse. Sarah saw it in the way he gripped the arm of the throne. Not for authority, but for balance. In the way his jaw locked during council meetings, the muscles in his neck rigid with a pain he refused to name. In the way his skin was losing color, the blue undertones spreading like ink through water. "You're dying," she said, catching him alone in the corridor after a feast he'd barely survived. He was leaning against the wall with one hand, breathing through his teeth. "Don't lie to me. I can see it. The curse accelerates when I..." He stopped, clenched his jaw. "When you what?" "When I feel something." His eyes met hers. "When I feel you." The curse was designed to be permanent. It fights anything that threatens it. And you... He looked at her with an expression that broke something open inside her chest. "You threaten it. So the closer you get to me, the faster it kills you. Yes. And you kept me here anyway. Yes. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to hold him. She did neither. Then we break it, she said. Tell me how. It can't be broken. I've had 600 years of witches, healers, and scholars confirm that. They weren't me. Varen moved 3 days later. He didn't come for Sarah directly. He was too clever for that. Instead, he sent a formal challenge to the Alpha's judgment through the Elder Council, invoking an ancient pack law that allowed the court to demand justification for any decision that endangered the pack. The frost was his evidence. The spreading cold, the weakening king, the strange human woman with no wolf blood, who had appeared and accelerated a curse that had been stable for centuries. She is the cause, Varen declared in the packed Great Hall, his voice carrying the weight of 2 centuries of political authority. Not the cure. Every day she remains, the king weakens. Every day she remains, the fortress freezes. The pack suffers for one man's obsession with a woman who is beneath this throne in every conceivable way. The hall murmured agreement. Sarah stood near the back, Ilara gripping her arm, and watched the room turn against her with the slow, sick momentum of a tide coming in. Kale sat on the wolf throne. He looked like death, pale, rigid, the blue undertone visible even in the firelight. But his eyes were burning. You invoke the old law, he said. I do. Then you know what it requires. If the court demands justification, the king must provide it, or yield the decision. Varen smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been planning this for weeks. I know. My justification, Kale said, and he stood, and the hall went dead silent, because he stood the way a mountain moves, slowly, inevitably, with the promise of devastation, is that she is my mate. The silence shattered into chaos. Wolves surged to their feet. Voices collided. Someone knocked over a bench. Varen's face went white, then red, then settled into something that looked like fury compressed into diamond. Impossible, he breathed. She has no wolf. The bond cannot form with... And yet it did. Kale's voice cut through the noise like a blade through smoke. My wolf woke for her. My wolf, silent for 600 years, recognized her before I understood what I was feeling. You want to challenge my judgment? Challenge the bond itself. Challenge the laws that are older than you, older than me, older than this fortress. The bond does not make her worthy of a crown. No, Kale said, and his voice dropped to something quiet and devastating. Her worth makes her worthy of a crown. The bond simply made sure I wasn't too frozen to see it. Sarah's knees nearly buckled, but Varen wasn't finished. His hand moved inside his cloak, and Sarah saw the glint of something metallic, small, dark, and wrong. An amulet. Black iron, etched with symbols that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. You kept it, Kale said. His voice had changed. The anchor. Someone had to ensure stability, Varen said, and the mask was gone now, replaced by something cold and righteous, and utterly convinced of its own necessity. 600 years of effective rule. 600 years of a king who made decisions with his mind, not his heart. The curse didn't weaken you, Kale. It perfected you. And I will not let some bond-sick girl undo centuries of... Sarah moved. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it. One moment she was standing at the back of the hall, and the next she was crossing the space between them, with a speed that surprised everyone in the room, herself most of all. She reached for the amulet. Varen snarled and shifted, partially, claws erupting, teeth lengthening. His hand caught her shoulder and threw her sideways. She hit the stone floor hard enough to see white. The cut on her cheek reopened. Blood ran hot down her jaw. The sound that came from Kale was not human. It was a roar that shook dust from the rafters and cracked the ice that had been creeping along the walls. Every wolf in the room dropped. Not knelt, dropped. Driven to the floor by the sheer force of an alpha command that bypassed thought and struck directly at the animal brain. Every wolf except Sarah. She was on her feet, blood on her face, hands steady. She looked at Kale, eyes blazing gold, body half shifted, claws where his fingers had been, every scar on his bare chest, standing out like white lightning against skin that was no longer blue, but flushed with heat and fury. And she didn't flinch. Not once. She walked to Varen, who was pinned to the floor by the Alpha's command, shaking, the amulet clutched in a clawed hand that he couldn't close. She knelt. She pried his fingers open. She took the amulet. It was cold. Colder than the frost room. Colder than the deepest winter. Cold enough that it burned. She could feel the curse inside it. 600 years of stolen warmth, compressed into dark iron, pulsing like a diseased heart. She looked at Kale. Together, she said. He crossed the hall in 3 strides. His hand, still half-clawed, still trembling, still radiating a heat she had only ever felt in brief, precious fragments, closed over hers. The amulet screamed. Not a sound, a sensation, a high, thin vibration that passed through the stone walls and the iron brackets and the bones of every wolf in the room. The frost on the walls cracked. Then it shattered, exploding outward in a shower of ice crystals that caught the firelight and turned the great hall into a cathedral of falling stars. Kale made a sound, a gasp, raw, broken, the sound of a man surfacing after 600 years underwater. His knees hit the stone. His hands found her waist, her arms, her face, touching her like a man who had just discovered that touch was possible, that skin could feel, that warmth existed and it was here and it was her. I feel you, he said, and his voice was wrecked, unrecognizable, and the tears on his face were the first he had shed in 6 centuries. I feel everything. I feel... She kissed him, not gently, not tentatively. She kissed him like she was finishing what she'd started the night she took his hand in the frost room, with the full, unapologetic force of a woman who had been beaten and bound and told she was nothing, kissing the most powerful creature alive, who had looked at her and seen everything. His arms closed around her. The hall was utterly silent. Then Elara started clapping. One pair of hands, small and stubborn in the vastness of the hall. Then another. Then another. Then the sound swelled until the great hall was thundering with it, and Sarah felt the vibration through the floor, and through his chest, and through the place where the curse had been, and warmth had finally, permanently, irrevocably returned. 3 months later, the gardens bloomed, not gradually, explosively, as if 600 years of suppressed spring had been released all at once. Roses climbed the fortress walls. Wildflowers erupted between the cobblestones. The walls complained about the pollen and smiled while doing it. Kale stood on the balcony of their chamber. Their chamber. Because she had refused a separate room, and he had refused to argue. And watched the sun set over a kingdom that no longer feared its king's cold. He was warm. Perpetually, absurdly, unreasonably warm. He had spent the first 2 weeks after the curse broke touching everything. Stone walls, wooden beams, the fur of a bewildered hound, the surface of water, the bark of trees, with the reverent wonder of a man experiencing the world for the first time. But mostly, he touched her. Sarah came up behind him and rested her chin on his shoulder. He reached back and pulled her round to his side, one arm anchoring her there with the casual possessiveness of a wolf who had found his mate and would spend the rest of his very long life making sure she knew it. "Letter from your father," she said, holding up a folded parchment. "What does Lord Aldrich want?" "Permission to visit. He addresses me as Your Majesty, most honoured Luna, beloved daughter." She paused. "That last part is new." Kale looked at her. "And?" "I wrote back. I told him he may visit when the roses reach the North Tower." "The North Tower is 60 feet high." "Yes," she smiled. "I thought that seemed fair." He laughed. The sound was still new enough to surprise them both. A real laugh, deep and warm, and slightly rusty from 6 centuries of disuse. Sarah felt it rumble through his chest, where she was pressed against him, and thought, This is what I fought for." Below them, the pack moved through the courtyard in the golden light. Wolves who had sneered at her now bowed when she passed, not from command, but from something harder to earn. Respect. Recognition. The quiet, grudging acknowledgement that the woman who had no wolf blood, no title, no name worth speaking, had walked into the coldest fortress in the world and set it on fire. Varen was gone, imprisoned in the eastern borderlands, stripped of rank, his name struck from the court records. Sarah had argued against execution, not from mercy, but from precision. Let him live long enough to hear what the kingdom became without his cold, careful control. The sun dropped below the tree line. The first stars appeared. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled. Not in mourning, not in warning, but in the wild, unself-conscious joy of an animal that was simply alive and wanted the world to know it. Kale pressed his lips to her hair. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For not flinching." She turned in his arms and looked up at him. This man, this impossible, scarred, too powerful, finely warm man, who had looked at a bleeding, furious nobody and seen a queen. "I never will," she said. And she meant it. Thank you so much for listening to this story tonight. I would truly love to hear what you thought. Which moment hit you the hardest? And where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop it in the comments. I always love reading them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you very soon.